online at cspan.org, or listen on the free C-SPAN radio app. Washington Journal continues.
Michelle Malkin joining us from New York City this morning to talk about her new book, Open Borders, Inc., Who's Funding America's Destruction? Ms. Malkin, what is this book about?
The book is about what I consider the global financiers of the migration crisis, the illegal alien caravans, the refugee resettlement racket that have all colluded together, I think, to undermine America's borders and ultimately America's sovereignty. The book is almost 500 pages with 1,600 plus footnotes and identifies nearly 400 individuals and organizations that I believe are behind this financing.
Who are they, and what evidence did you find that confirms they're behind it?
So, as I said, the book is heavily cited, and people can do their own homework to fact check my facts, a lot of which come from think tank studies, original source documents. Many of the sources that I've built up over the last 25 plus years reporting on this issue as an editorial writer and columnist at the Los Angeles Daily News, up in the Pacific Northwest at the Seattle Times. This is my 7th book, my 3rd one that concentrates on immigration. And many of the groups and individuals identify are very familiar to people who have been researching and care about immigration enforcement. Billionaire George Soros, of course, is probably the most famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, financier of many of the groups that have lobbied for illegal alien amnesty, as well as expansion of and you know, the sort of permanent foundation of things like the refugee resettlement program. But I also identify some forces, very powerful forces and financial interests on the right. And I think it's always been my imperative as an independent blogger and journalist and researcher not to shy away when there are special interests ostensibly on my side of the aisle that are responsible for the negative impacts of illegal immigration.
Let's take George Soros first. How has he financed these programs that you talked about? And also, did you find that he was behind the caravans of people coming from Central America? That is one claim that has been made by viewers on this program, that George Soros was behind that.
Yes. So George Soros's net worth is estimated at $25.2 billion. And recently he announced that he was going to earmark $18 billion of that to direct to his Open Society foundations. And it's the Open Society Institute, the foundations, all of its grantees and sub-grantees that have created an entire network of legal resources and volunteer organizations and what I consider radical identity politics groups that are out there undermining the enforcement of our laws and, yes, our American sovereignty. It's not just some sort of theory. I've read George Soros's work, and he argues that sovereignty is, quote, an obstacle to his ultimate goal, global governance. In other words, using transnational organizations like the United Nations or the European Union or any number of non-governmental organizations outside of the United States that don't have our own sovereignty in their interest. And so there are copious appendices in the books that name many of these sources, these Soros-funded groups that are either allied with him or directly or indirectly funded by him. But I think it's important, and I make this very important theme of the book, that he couldn't do it alone. And there are forces on the other side of the political spectrum. People probably would be surprised if they don't follow these issues closely, that the Koch brothers, and of course David Koch recently passed away, but the Koch Institute and many of their organizations are also sort of ideologically aligned with Soros and his network because they have similar goals. Open Borders also provides cheap labor for a lot of the big business interests that are on the same side as the amnesty profiteers.
And who are the people, well, you just named them, Koch brothers, but who are some other names, or are there politicians on, quote, your side of the aisle who also contribute to this?
So there are a number of elected members of Congress that joined efforts like the Gang of Eight, for example. And some of them have recently come around to supporting the Trump enforcement agenda, but it wasn't long ago that they also were behind blanket amnesties or pardons for the upwards of 30 million illegal aliens that are here. Marco Rubio was a part of that, Lindsey Graham at one point. I mentioned the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I also, tread on somewhat dangerous ground because I talk about my own experience at CPAC earlier this year, which is run by Matt and Mercedes Schlapp, who are part of the close inner circle of the Trump administration. And they also have business interests and lobbying interests that go against the idea that we should have more order and more limitations. And in my view, a moratorium on all immigration until we can get some sort of control over the chaos, the deliberate chaos that has existed for the 25 plus years that I've been covering the issue.
Last month in the Washington Journal, we had American Immigration Lawyers Association Executive Director Ben Johnson, and he was asked about the ways U.S. can enact policies that encourage legal immigration. Take a listen to his answer.
I think if you have a visa system that reflects the needs of the economy and the needs of the families that are here, that's going to be the greatest incentive for people to come legally. I mean, if you give people an option of coming legally or illegally, people are going to choose the legal way. The problem now is that the legal pathways in the United States are incredibly difficult, if not non-existent, for many, many categories. When we were building houses in the early 2000s at an incredible rate, we needed construction workers to help build those houses. There is no visa available for construction workers. It takes 10 years for them to get a green card and no temporary system for construction workers. We were daring immigrants to come to the United States to take jobs that we needed, right? We had this help wanted, keep out sign at the border, and you can't have that kind of schizophrenia, particularly when you have the world's largest, most powerful economy. That's what we don't want to fight in the immigration system, is our own economy. Align our system with the needs of our economy and the needs of our families with legal ways for people to get here, and you won't have to spend so much time enforcing the immigration system because people will come legally.
Michelle Malkin, your response.
Yeah, let me unpack that. So I don't believe that the almighty dollar and profits and low wages for workers should drive our immigration system. We just recently marked the 18th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And in large part, it was because prioritizing the economy over our security and sovereignty led to such catastrophic events. And we have already the most generous system when it comes to legal immigration, whether it's the kind of work visas that the Ayla lawyer was talking about, and there are a number of them that have been exploited to our detriment. One of the last books I wrote was called Sold Out, and it was fascinating because when I appeared on C-SPAN, there was unanimity among the left, right, and center callers that those kind of programs were being abused and were not protecting American workers and resulting in IT workers here in America of all backgrounds who were being forced to retrain their cheap foreign replacements before they got their pink slips. That is not the way that a sovereign nation should conduct its immigration system.
We'll go to calls. Art in Taylor, Michigan, Republican. Art, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Question or comment here from Michelle Malkin.
Oh, you got me on the wrong one. I was calling in for the gun violence.
All right. Well, let me go on to George, who's in Hudson, Florida, Republican. Hi, George.
Good morning, Greta. How are you?
Morning.
Michelle, you are my hero. You're the best conservative pundit out there. I've been following you for years and years, and I love what you're doing. My question to you is, this hearing yesterday with Corey Lewandowski, where they're the fake, the faux impeachment hearings. I mean, it's just a bunch of baloney. I'm wondering what's your opinion of that hearing and what's going on with the House Judiciary Committee and especially Jerry Nadler and Sheila Jackson Lee and Johnson, that joker from Georgia. I have no idea what he was talking about at the time, and it's just crazy. I think they need that. You need to go in front of that committee and tell them exactly what you feel about them.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you to the caller. It was quite a circus, and I think that Corey Lewandowski handled it exactly right to call them out for it. I do have to give credit to the Democrats for having a laser focus and drumming their narratives over and over and over again. Although it looks like chaos, it is controlled chaos, and they have incredible message discipline. If only many of the establishment Republicans in the swamp could exhibit the same kind of discipline when it comes to issues of immigration and immigration enforcement. We should be having those 1-minute speeches in the House every night at midnight like we used to do in the mid to late 1990s, hammering home the bloody consequences and the dangerous consequences of immigration chaos. I was recently in Montgomery County last week, where nearly 1,000 grassroots patriots turned out for a Stand with ICE rally to call attention to how sanctuary policies were endangering girls and women. This is not on the front page of the New York Times or most of the mainstream media, but the Republicans could be doing so much more to make this as much of a focus. The other I word, not impeachment, but invasion, and how it's metastasized in every city in America.
Have you been to the southern border? And if so, for how long? What was your experience?
Many, many times. I've done documentaries from there where I spent time with ranchers in Arizona. I've been to El Paso and saw the incredible We Build the Wall project, private citizens who are doing what the government has failed to do for decades and decades. Of course, I started out my career in Los Angeles, and it's not just the siege that's been laid at the southern border, but it's also our northern border as well, and the neglect, the national security implications of basically having orange rubber cones protect us from any number of malefactors who could just traipse across the border. The problem, of course, is that every town now is a border town because of the spread into the interior and sanctuary policies that block local and state law enforcement officials from communicating with federal ICE agents who've been increasingly demonized by the media, by Hollywood, and every mainstream Democratic presidential candidate.
We'll go to Anthony next in New York. Democratic caller.
Hello?
Morning.
Yes, I wanted to ask Michelle about the open borders. With the open borders, the Democrats are probably benefiting from it because of the drugs, the trafficking, and all the illegal immigrants coming in. With that and their socialism, will the illegal immigrants help them go from socialism to dictatorship?
So there are a lot of special interests involved on both the left and the right, and people always ask, well, what do the Democrats get out of this? Don't they care about the preservation of their country and the rule of law? And there used to be Democrats who were sane on this issue. Barbara Jordan, who was an African-American Texas congresswoman, led an immigration commission that talked about the importance of being able to debate rationally what the numbers of people should be that we bring into the country, what values, what traits they have, and if they don't belong here, what kind of orderly process we have in place to remove people who don't belong here. And that part of the debate has been completely obliterated on the Democrat Party. That's just illegal immigration. A lot of Open Borders Inc. also talks about the refugee resettlement racket, and we've resettled about 3 million refugees into the country, redistributed them in pockets all over flyover country, and there's very little, if any, input among these communities who have their own sort of domestic and native problems and are being hijacked by a small group of government subcontractors, mostly religious nonprofits, that are making billions, literally billions of dollars off of this scheme. And you look at the transformation of places like the Twin Cities, which has a massively large population of Somalian Muslims, many of them unassimilated. And Department of Homeland Security officials have now identified the Twin Cities as the terror recruiting capital of the world. How did this happen? Follow the money, find the truth.
How do you respond, Michelle Malkin, to the Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of Louisville, Kentucky, when he writes, we must call our elected officials to live up to the ideals of this nation in welcoming and treating humanely those vulnerable persons fleeing violence, persecution, and economic instability in their countries of origin?
I believe that our asylum system is very precious, and for legitimate claimants of religious, ethnic, political persecution or otherwise, it is very imperative that we protect that system and make sure that we are discriminating, and I mean that not in some sort of pejorative way, about who we allow to benefit from it. The problem, of course, is that the asylum system has been deliberately exploited and undermined by an entire system of people who manufacture claims because they know once they show up at the border and make such a claim and cooked up and fraudulent and coached, that they'll turn around and be released, never to be found again. Anybody who actually works in the immigration system knows that the asylum program has become a lottery, basically. I also have a very important chapter on the role that the Vatican and the Catholic Church have played themselves from profiting off of the refugee resettlement racket, invoking scripture, perverting it, and I think deluding a lot of rank and file Catholics into thinking that the imperative should be to open the floodgates and the borders to every last person outside of the world, when that's not what our country was founded on. The Statue of Liberty's poem and Emma Lazarus are not the guiding principles and law behind our immigration system. The Constitution is, and Article 4, Section 4 specifically says that it is the role of the federal government to protect the states against invasion.
We'll go down to Kentucky, Madisonville, Kentucky. Larry's watching there, Republican.
Yes, mine was mainly on the gun violence, but I'm 54 years old, and I have been involved in finding some of the drug tunnels that for every 10 that are found, there's 100 more being built as we speak. But in high school, I can remember deer season being in, and every truck in the high school parking lot had a deer rifle or a shotgun or some kind of weapon and like I said, I'm 54 years old, and we never had school shootings when I was in school, and there was a gun in every car in the parking lot. And I think it's more of cultural than it is gun, you know.
So yeah, so I definitely could come back and talk about guns. I think what I will do is recommend another book that was recently released by a man that I greatly admire, Andrew Pollack, who lost his daughter Meadow in the Parkland High School shooting. And he is somebody who has been very vigilant about commemorating his daughter's legacy by actually proposing reality-based solutions to the problem that don't solely rely on gun control radicalism. Why Meadow Died is the book.
Lawton, Michigan. Bob, independent caller. You're next for Michelle Malkin.
Yeah, Michelle, I'm happy to see that you've expanded the amount of undocumented people in this country to 30 million, which it is. That's nice to hear. Also, I wonder if you have some actual facts about what are the employers, what is their responsibility, what are the penalties for employing illegal workers, and how many times has that ever been used in our law? And the third thing is, could you describe the final outcome of the group La Raza, which started back in the 1960s?
Yes.
And their actual agenda for everybody.
Yes. I'll address all 3 points. So there's a very important section that I included in the front of Open Borders, Inc. called Open Borders, Inc. by the Numbers. And the static estimate of the number of illegal aliens has always somehow been bizarrely frozen at between 11 and 13 million, which is an old figure from the Pew Research Center. But the really updated figure actually comes not from any right-wing group, but from Princeton researchers who had a much more accurate count of upwards of 30 million. And those figures are all footnoted if you want to check the sources on that. The second question was about employer sanctions. And we have been very lousy. This is a failure of the federal government. You can't blame all of the illegal aliens who are simply responding to incentives. And when there isn't full enforcement against employers who are breaking the law, U.S. Code Chapter 8, Sections 1324 and 1325 against aiding, abetting, harboring, employing, and sheltering illegal aliens, of course people are going to do what they're incentivized to do. And we have had a number of targeted enforcement actions, or in the Open Borders vernacular, raids on certain plants, including Coke company plants in the South. But we need much more than that, and we need full enforcement of E-Verify as well. The third point was on the National Council of La Raza, and I talk a little bit about their history, particularly their role in weaponizing language against anyone who criticizes open borders. They were at the heart of that, which of course led to the Southern Poverty Law Center going after immigration enforcement patriots. It's a very important chapter because it talks about the confluence of the war on our borders, the war on sovereignty, and the increasing war on free speech that's being enabled by Silicon Valley.
Bob in Lawton, Michigan. We already talked to Bob. Let me go to Eric, who's in Fort Myers, Florida, Democratic caller. Eric, good morning.
Hey, good morning. How you doing, Michelle?
Good. How are you?
Well, yeah, I'm a Democrat. I've followed your career for about a good 10 years, so, I don't really think very much of you, but that's okay. I've noticed most of the time, the reason why I don't thrilled about you is because most of my, wealthy Asian women that are, your age or younger than me, they all follow you, which is kind of annoying. But, you seem to always want to attack, and you just said it even about 5 minutes ago in your program, how when you talk about immigration, you go right to 9/11 and all these Islamic attacks, and you're wrong about Muslims and foreigners assimilating in this country. We are the #1 country where people assimilate. You've been wrong about a lot of things, like, giving unemployment benefits would keep joblessness going. That didn't, our employment is doing really good, even although Obama gave everybody food stamps and welfare for a long period of time. I just can't understand why my question is, you keep on wanting to harp on Muslims, terrorists, and then say, oh, immigration. Where do you connect those two?
So the first book that I wrote in 2002 was called Invasion, and it talked about how tolerance for open borders paved the way for the 19 hijackers to blend in among these upwards of 30 million illegal aliens. And I talk about the direct nexus in the Beltway swamp, where you had sanctuary cities and counties on both sides of the swamp, in Maryland and in Fairfax County and Arlington, where several of the hijackers intersected with illegal alien day laborers at 7-Elevens who took them to DMVs to obtain ID that allowed them to board the planes that were driven into the World Trade Centers, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And the failure to learn those lessons endangers all of us. The idea that we should have a strict immigration enforcement system is not because I hate Muslims or because I hate people from Central America or Mexico. And I think it's that sort of monomaniacal concentration on redefining policy criticisms as quote-unquote hate that's led to the paralysis that we have. And this is very deliberate on the part of groups like Media Matters, which labeled me a white nationalist without having a single specific criticism or refutation of anything in the nearly 500 pages of the book that I just published, Open Borders, Inc., let alone any of the 7 total books that I've written, including the 2 others on immigration, Invasion, and Sold Out.
Mark in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, independent.
Yes, Michelle, I agree with everything you're saying, basically. And the thing is, the biggest problem we have in this country is that Congress, they're not working. I mean, they can't do things partisan. They bipartisan. They got to fight each other. They got to all this crap that's going on with impeachment and all this other stuff is taken away from the immigration issues. Nobody wants to work on anything. And the thing is that you can't just have open borders. You have to know who's coming to any country. MS-13 is a very dangerous organization, and they're an organization, and they're a very organized organization, and they're out to take over the United States. And also, you got these left-wing governments down in Central America that they don't like us. They're looking to harm us, so they're sending they're going to send us all their garbage. And I'm not calling people garbage, but the thing is that they're sending us, on desirables. We do need to increase our population in this country. We do have a shrinking population. We do have to increase it. But the bottom line is, yes, we got to know who's coming in this country. But we have to fix this immigration system. And if these two sides keep on fighting, we're never going to have a resolution to this. And I agree with you 100%.
I totally agree. Yes. Yes, I totally agree. And the lack of focus, as I mentioned earlier, is appalling when you think of just one issue where we should have complete agreement across the board. Criminal aliens do not belong in this country. And they're terrorizing not only American citizens and law-abiding legal immigrants, but other people in the so-called migrant community who have no voice. And Montgomery County is a perfect example of that. We now have local law enforcement there leaking information that is being whitewashed by the local government there that is so overly zealously committed to open borders that it would rather sacrifice 6-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 16-year-olds who have been allegedly raped by at least 10 criminal alien suspects, people who've been through the revolving door of catch and release. That's a deliberate policy of Montgomery County, and that is it's sort of a textbook example of how sanctuary works. And you have these cities and counties and states that are colluding, and in large part it is being supported by this infrastructure of Open Borders, Inc. It's not some accident that you have the spread of nearly 564 sanctuary jurisdictions. And in operation, if we don't stop it, we're going to end up being a sanctuary nation instead of a sovereign one.
The book is Open Borders, Inc. Who's Funding America's Destruction? Michelle Malkin, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Very much appreciate it, Greta. Thank you.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll return to our question that we asked of all of you earlier this morning. Your ideas for reducing gun violence in the United States. It's your turn to tell Washington what you think they should do as the president, Republicans, and Democrats continue to negotiate in hopes of finding some bipartisan legislation that could pass the Senate and get approved by the president. There are the phone numbers on your screen. We'll get back to that conversation in a minute. But first, we just want to show you a little bit from last night's Press versus Politicians Spelling Bee. Yesterday on the program, Congressman Jamie Raskin was here. He said he participated last year, but was eliminated when he could not spell Pinot Grigio. Last night, here is the word that was given to Congressman Raskin.
Okay, this is a fake news round. These are news headlines. Ex-prisoner models Kim Kardashian West lingerie.
Ex-prisoner
models Kim Kardashian West lingerie.
Kim Kardashian West. Does she have West and East factions? Like, so is that? Wait,
I know as
Kim
little about her as is possible to know. So.
Okay, wait. Kim Kardashian West.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Now refresh my memory, if you would. Okay.
So the headline is,
yeah.
Ex-prisoner models Kim Kardashian West lingerie.
Well, that's got to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. That's got to be true, yeah.
I won't ask why it's got to be true.
Because if you said it wasn't true, I'm sure I could have found an example of it. So,
so your word is lingerie or lingerie.
So I already got a point for that.
Yes.
Lingerie. All right. Lingerie. Lingerie. Lingerie.
Correct.
Yeah.
Washington Journal continues.
We'll wrap up today's Washington Journal with your ideas on how to prevent gun